Afternoon, everyone. I see a bunch of people connecting to audio, so I'll just give it a few seconds as everyone joins. Most people are connected. Well, thank you so much for joining us today for Ask the Alliance. The Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to bring together communities, companies, and conservationists to improve the lands and waters in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So last summer, the Alliance hosted a live webinar series, which we called Breakfast on the Bay. And through this webinar series, we united our Alliance staff expertise with our partners' experience to explore the impact we have on the Chesapeake Bay health. As the Alliance staff continues to grow, so does our expertise. So this year, we are renaming our webinar series to Ask the Alliance. So our Alliance staff can share their expertise and passion with you for how you can, what you can do to both enjoy and improve the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And you'll have the opportunity at the end to ask the Alliance. With the hope for these sessions to be as interactive as possible, feel free to join with your camera on. Just please remain on mute during the session. You will have the opportunity to ask questions in the last few minutes of our session. You may submit them in the chat during Carly's presentation today. I'll certainly share those with her at the end, or you can feel free to save your questions for the end. Either works for us. With that, today I'm excited to welcome and introduce Carly Starobin, our DC Projects Coordinator, to share how you can manage your stormwater in the Chesapeake Bay. Carly, pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you everyone for joining. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that look good? Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Welcome everyone. My name again is Carly Starobin, and I am the DC Projects Coordinator with the Alliance, and we'll be talking today about how to manage your stormwater. Some initial info about the Alliance. I'm going to kind of zip through this because Lauren did just go over our mission. We bring together communities, companies, and conservationists to improve the lands and waters of the Chesapeake Bay with core values of collaboration, inclusivity, and being results driven. We have 4 offices located throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Our headquarters office is in Annapolis, Maryland. We also have an office in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and down in Richmond, Virginia. And then we have our office here in Washington, DC, which is the office that I am based out of. It is right in the Eastern Market sort of Marine Barracks area, if you are familiar with DC geography. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in the kind of DC metro area, the DMV. I've been here my whole life. I even went to college within the watershed. So I have really, built a connection over many years with the watershed. I'm not necessarily a huge fisher or hunter. My favorite ways to connect with the water and with the watershed are going to the beach, and I'm a big hiker. Love getting out of DC, getting up to Great Falls or out to the West Virginia border. They're both pretty close to this area. All right, so today we will be going through, first off, what is stormwater and what is stormwater runoff. We'll talk a little bit about how it affects us, and then we'll really get into the meat of this presentation, which is how you can address it at home or wherever you may be having stormwater issues. All right, so what is stormwater runoff? So stormwater is rainfall that isn't able to soak into the ground once it falls. So that's what rainfall is supposed to do in an ideal situation. It's supposed to soak into the ground where it falls. Unfortunately, because of a variety of things that we will talk about, stormwater runoff occurs when that water flows over land or some kind of hard surface instead of soaking into the ground. And what happens is if you're in a rural area, sometimes that water will flow directly into local water bodies. If you're in a more urban area, it can flow into the local storm drains. And as it is flowing over land and hard surfaces, it is picking up a bunch of pollutants on the way that it does carry into its final destination. Here's a nice little graphic of all the different places that stormwater can run off from. So it can come from the roof of any building, down the gutter, down the downspout, into the streets. It can come from pet waste. It can come from chemical fertilizers, herbicides, anything like that, insecticides. It can come from the street, from gasoline, from motor oil, anything like that. And that flows in either into storm drains or directly into our local water bodies. And of course affects the fish, the lovely little turtles, any kind of wildlife or plants that are in that water body. So we're going to be talking about a little bit of like vocabulary here that's good to know. Impervious surfaces, you'll hear me mention a couple times. So impervious, you may have also heard the term impermeable. They mean the same thing. That is a surface that water cannot pass through. So that's any kind of paved area that could be asphalt, concrete, your typical street, driveway, sidewalk, anything like that. On the flip side, a pervious or permeable surface, which again, they mean the same thing, is a surface that does allow water to filter down directly into the ground. So that's grass, any sort of planted or vegetated area. And impervious surfaces are what we're going to be looking at as a problem for stormwater runoff, because that is what is causing stormwater runoff, essentially. The water hits that impervious land and it's not able to filter down. It has to flow laterally instead of infiltrating straight down. So here is a nice map of impervious cover in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. At first glance, you might be thinking, oh, well, there's a lot of black area, not too many, yellow and orange dots. So there isn't that much impervious cover. However, if we look at the more urban areas, so Richmond, DC, Baltimore, we definitely see a higher percentage of impervious cover. And that's pretty typical of urban areas. It's fairly common that urban areas will have more streets, more buildings, more roads, more driveways, parking lots, all that good stuff that contributes to impervious surfaces. So how do these impervious surfaces and stormwater runoff affect both us and the environment? Environmentally speaking, we've talked a little bit about how stormwater runoff can pick up pollution. So that's anything trash, toxins, oil, pet waste, chemicals, and it can carry all those substances into our water bodies. So that's kind of a water quality issue. Stormwater runoff can also be a quantity issue. So as you can see here on the left, great volumes of stormwater runoff will actually contribute to a lot of erosion. It'll pick up soil, grass, and it'll slowly erode away an area if there's a significant volume of stormwater hitting one spot. And it can create some pretty dangerous situations, as you can see in this photo. And so whether we're talking about sediment or like trash chemicals flowing into our local water bodies, of course, we all know that that harms the local ecosystems. It kind of has a ripple effect. Any fish or even vegetation that are in that water are affected by that pollution. It affects our ability to swim and recreate in that area. Even sediment pollution, when you look at a water body, at a stream or a river, and it looks really brown and muddy, that's sediment pollution. And that's, of course, not something we want to swim in, not something that fish and wildlife enjoy either. In terms of how it can affect us, as we can see here on the right, obviously a good amount of flooding and puddling on your property can cause property damage. It can cause foundation issues. If that gets down into your foundation, it can cause trees to fall if there's puddling around a specific tree. And it's washing away the soil from those tree roots. It can uproot the soil and that tree can fall. Mosquitoes, we all know, love standing water. So it can be a health problem too if mosquitoes are gathering on your property or on any site. And then again, it can affect our ability to fish or recreate on the water, swim in the water, anything like that. If you didn't know, stormwater is actually the fastest growing source of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It comes as a shock to some people, but there are a few contributors that are leading to that. So the first one is climate change. Rainfall and storms are getting worse in this area. If you live anywhere near me, we have had some pretty crazy storms this summer that just drop a crazy amount of stormwater in a very short time. And that's contributing to stormwater runoff, of course. Increased impermeable surfaces. So as land is being developed, more parking lots are being created, more buildings are being built, more roads are being built. That is increasing impervious cover and increasing stormwater runoff in turn. And then the last one is limited capacity of local storm drains. So a lot, especially on the East Coast and in our Chesapeake Bay region, a lot of our city infrastructure and our storm drains were simply not built to handle the amount of water that we are now receiving because of current climate change conditions, which will only get worse over time. And so our storm drains, often during large storm events, they can either overflow because there's just, again, water quantity issue, there's too much water coming into them, or they can become clogged with the amount of trash that is flowing into them. All right, and now we will get into how to address stormwater at your home. Another vocab term that is going to be really helpful to know as I go through some of these different strategies is stormwater BMPs or green infrastructure. So stormwater BMPs, BMP stands for best management practice. And so these are practices that you can install on a site that will help you address stormwater issues on that site. Green infrastructure in particular is an approach to stormwater management that protects, restores, or mimics the natural water cycle. So it can improve water quality, reduce the flooding or quantity like we've talked about, and in turn, it can also increase wildlife habitat and help improve air quality. So again, I'll reiterate, there are two goals, kind of reducing the quantity and the volume of stormwater runoff happening, and also improving the quality of that water. So we'll go through a bunch of the different practices now. The first one we'll talk about is conservation landscaping, or bayscaping as it's called in the Chesapeake Bay region. This is a practice that involves replacing a typical lawn with native plants. So as you can see here on the left, this yard used to be just a regular lawn. You can see there's a lot of erosion happening. It's likely that water from a house situated here on the right side is flowing down this hill, eroding away that soil, eroding away any sort of grass there, and it is flowing into the street here on the left, and then probably ending up in that local storm drain. Not a great situation. And so bayscaping is replacing that area with native plants that you can see here on the right. And native plants, if we're not aware, are plants that are native to the Chesapeake Bay region, as opposed to being introduced from a different country, a different climate, anything like that. So the benefits of native plants are plenty. They have very deep root systems. And so they're able to absorb more stormwater than a non-native plant or than a typical lawn with regular grass. Those deep root systems will also help stabilize the soil and reduce the erosion like we're seeing in this picture. Those roots will actually, go down pretty far and keep the soil together. Native plants are also very accustomed to our climate and our region here. So they are used to the amount of rain we get. They're used to the amount of sun we get. They are drought resistant. And of course, they provide habitat for some of our pollinators, butterflies and bees. They love our native plants. So that is kind of a summary of bayscaping, and it's a fairly easy practice to install. There are lists of native plants available pretty much anywhere. Chesapeake Bay program has a pretty solid list of native plants to Chesapeake Bay. And we also have a resource called the Native Plant Center online that you can look up and also get a lot of information on what plants are native to this region. The next practice we'll talk about is another landscaping practice, these are rain gardens. So they are kind of a similar concept, although they are much more design oriented. So rain gardens, as you can see in this diagram on the left, are kind of a bowl-shaped design. And that is specifically so that they can capture more stormwater. So they're planted with native plants, similar to how a bayscape or conservation landscaping area would be. But because of this bowl-shaped design, they actually can capture a lot more stormwater. And the soil that is built up around these plants is actually amended to have more stormwater capture capacity than a normal soil would. And so the benefits of these practices, you can kind of see on the left here, you can actually take a downspout from your home and direct that right into the rain garden. So any water that is coming down from your roof will actually be directed directly into the rain garden. They can also be really good at capturing what's called sheet flow from the surrounding area on your property. So if you're getting water from a neighbor's property, maybe they're situated uphill and you're situated a little bit downhill, rain gardens can be really beneficial for capturing runoff. Yeah. Next, we will talk about rain barrels. Concept of rain barrels might be fairly self-explanatory, but there are a couple interesting things to note about them. So rain barrels are a container that sits at the bottom of your downspout and collects water during storm events. As you can see kind of here on the left hand picture, the downspout will come down and you'll have one end of the downspout that goes into the rain barrel and will be collecting water during storm events. However, there is also a section of downspout that will be diverted from the barrel. And that is because rain barrels cannot collect water in winter. As water freezes, it expands a little bit as it's going from liquid to a solid state. And so having water in your barrel during the winter when temperatures are below freezing can actually cause the barrel to crack. And so barrels are really great at capturing water in the summer, spring, fall, but when temperatures drop below freezing, there's a little knob on the rain barrels themselves. And water will need to be diverted away from the barrel in the winter. However, the water from your barrel, it can be used in so many different ways. The water does need to be emptied between each rainfall event, which can get kind of hard in the depths of summer when it's, you know, storming maybe every day. But this water does need to be emptied. It is not potable water. We do like to emphasize, please do not drink water from your rain barrel. We don't know what is coming down off of your roof. There could be bacteria. There is a filter inside many rain barrels, so you're not going to get leaves or large branches, but we don't know bacteria, chemicals, paint, whatever may be coming off your roof. We want to make sure we're not drinking that. But this water can be used to water plants on your property. If you have a garden or trees on your property, that water can be used to water that vegetation. It can be used to wash your car, wash your pets, wash your gardening tools. You can even fill up a watering can and bring it inside to water indoor plants. Although the water might have some pollutants from your roof, it is still considered soft water as opposed to hard water, which is what is going to come out of your faucet and contains things like chlorine, fluoride, salts, all that. So this water is still closer to rainwater than the water from your faucet. So it is really good for vegetation, no matter what. And in the depths of summer, if you're really maximizing the water from your rain barrel, it can save you up to $3,000 on your water bill, which is a pretty big incentive. All right, next we'll talk about permeable pavement. This is definitely the most costly practice that we have talked about so far. But what it is, as you can see, they look like regular pavers, except they have gaps in between them, and that is where the water can actually infiltrate down into the ground. And similar to a rain garden, a downspout from your house can be connected into a permeable paver system. And it's particularly beneficial because that downspout, as opposed to letting out onto the surface of the pavers, what happens is that downspout can actually be directed underground. So the way permeable paver systems work is there's paver bricks sitting at the surface, the top layer, and then underneath that, there is give or take 18 inches that are excavated and filled in with different successive layers of gravel. And so that is what really maximizes the infiltration of that area. And so when a downspout is directed from the house, it can go directly underground and into those gravel layers underneath the pavers. So that water is not getting the chance to become surface runoff at all because it is going directly underground. So it's a really, really beneficial practice in terms of stormwater capture. They're also very long lasting because they're kind of individual pavers that interlock together. They're very durable. They really, very rarely do they like crack over time, even if the ground settles in some places because they're interlocking bricks. They really don't crack as much as like concrete or asphalt does that you might have seen. And then these are also a really popular option for driveways, parking pads, patios, anything like that. If you realize that your driveway, for example, is causing some impervious surface runoff on your property and you want to take out that impervious surface, but you still need a parking lot or you still need a parking pad or you still need a driveway or you still want to be able to put your grill and fire pit and patio seating out in your yard, these are a really popular option because you can park on that area, you can still use it the same as you would any paved area. An alternative to permeable pavement that is a bit more cost effective but isn't quite as beneficial stormwater wise is porous concrete. That is another option to look into. Next, we'll talk about green roofs. Again, maybe self-explanatory, but we'll talk about it anyway. Green roofs are a roof that is planted with some kind of growing media, aka soil, and then some sort of plants are placed on top of that. We, again, would probably prefer some kind of native plant to be used, but it usually needs to be something short with a relatively small root system, so it doesn't interfere with the roof or the building infrastructure at all. They're really good at reducing stormwater runoff. Again, similar to permeable pavers, they are preventing that water from becoming surface runoff in the first place because it's being captured directly on the roof. It's not getting a chance to go down that gutter, down that downspout, and onto the ground at all. They're relatively low maintenance because they're getting the water and the sunlight that they need from being on the roof. And they're really popular for, I would say, like a roof courtyard or anything like that. There are residential green roofs, at least here in DC, like we do see residential green roofs. They're definitely a really cool idea and a really cool practice if it's something you're interested in. They can also help reduce temperatures. So they reduce temperature of the air around them simply because they're vegetated instead of being a roof. So they're kind of like absorbing a lot of light and heat instead of reflecting it back up. They also can reduce the ambient air temperature for the area around them. And so they kind of act as a layer of insulation for the building that they're placed on top of. And so they actually can help save energy in that building, which is kind of an added benefit, not stormwater relevant, but climate relevant. We got to talk about trees. Trees capture stormwater too, among the other myriad of benefits that they do have. Improving air quality, providing native habitat, all that good stuff. They actually are really good tools for capturing stormwater too. Again, if you're interested in tree planting on your property or on any site, we would definitely recommend looking into native species of trees so that you can really maximize the health of that tree, how it's going to impact the local environment and address stormwater. There are a few other options. I'm not going to go into depth about any of these because they are not green infrastructure. They are more mechanical options, but I did want to address them because you will see a lot of properties, especially in highly urban areas that have dry wells, sump pumps in the basement, and infiltration trenches. So if you're interested in any of those, that is something you can look into separately. Back to some of the practices that we just went over. What is really cool about them is a lot of them can actually be connected together to really help you get maximum stormwater benefit on your property. So starting with this picture on the far left, you can see there's a rain barrel attached to this downspout, and this white vertical portion of the downspout, you can see that's going straight down. This is actually newly installed permeable pavers. And so what's happening on this downspout is any stormwater that is coming off the roof is coming down that downspout. First, it's going into the rain barrel. When that rain barrel fills up, or in the winter when it isn't able to collect water, that water is then going straight down into the permeable paver system. So you can really get a good visual here of how that downspout isn't letting out onto the surface. It is going straight underground where it has much better chances of infiltrating down vertically instead of laterally, like we talked about. This picture here in the center, you can see there is a rain barrel situated here on the left. And then if you look closely, there is a black hose coming out. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, I'm tracing it with my mouse, but there is a black hose coming out of the bottom of the barrel that is leading into this lovely vegetation that is here in this yard. So again, when that barrel fills up, the extra water is coming down and out into this vegetation. Rain barrels are a really popular practice to install in coordination with something else. All rain barrels do have an overflow hose, which acts as, like we've said, the winter, substitute. And also when the barrel is full, water will go down through that overflow hose. So it is fairly easy to attach that overflow hose to any sort of landscaping practice, direct it towards some trees on your property, any of the other practices. It's really easy to pair some together. And then this practice here on the right, you can see it's a really good mix of everything. We got a rain barrel up here on the house. We have a nice garden planted right here. And you can see it's recently rained and we don't see puddling. We don't see flooding. It's really like an all-in-one property. Maintenance. Maintenance is a really big thing with all of these practices. Any of the landscaping practices, so that would be the conservation landscaping, the trees, the rain gardens, anything like that, even green roofs, they will require typical landscaping maintenance. This picture here on the left, it is very hard to tell. It is actually a very, very overrun and overgrown rain garden. So all of these areas do need to be weeded. The plants do need to be pruned, and the plants do occasionally need to be watered, especially when they are first planted. So native plants, they are really accustomed to this area. Getting them started when they are first planted, it's really important that they're getting the water that they need. So it can happen if you don't take care of these practices. They will become overrun with weeds or invasive species, anything like that, and then you're not getting the stormwater benefit that you hope to be getting from those practices. It's not maximizing its potential. This diagram up here on the right shows rain barrels. This is actually the practice of that knob that I mentioned that can turn your rain barrel from collection mode to diversion mode. It's also known as winterizing your barrel. So you'll need to do this with pretty much any rain barrel, although it might look different depending on the brand or manufacturer of that barrel. The biggest maintenance thing is going to be making sure that that barrel is empty in the winter so that it doesn't crack or break in any way. And this picture here on the bottom, so this white plastic thing is actually a downspout filter. These are very common on practices where the downspout from your roof is being directed into the practice. So rain gardens, permeable pavers, any practice where a downspout is coming from your roof being directed into a stormwater practice. This is a filter that is installed on the downspout, kind of at eye level or like breast height, you could say. And there is, can't tell super well, but behind these white spokes, there is a very fine mesh layer that is collecting leaves, debris, bugs, anything that is coming off of your roof, it is capturing that before that can get down into your stormwater practice, because any sort of buildup of leaves, twigs, any kind of organic matter really can potentially clog those practices. And again, they won't be maximizing their stormwater benefit. So downspout filters, big maintenance thing, they do need to be cleaned out periodically, which can be done by hand, just as you're seeing in the photo. It's not a super heavy lift, but they do need to be cleaned out periodically. And the last thing I will say is that if you are interested in some of these practices, if you're having stormwater issues on your property, many municipalities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed have incentive programs for installing these practices. So I've listed some of the programs here that I personally am familiar with. If your area is not listed on here, I would highly recommend going to your local government, county government, or municipality page and seeing if they have an incentive program for residents who are experiencing stormwater issues. These can be a range of different programs. There are rebate programs so you can install one of these practices on your property and then apply for a partial rebate for the costs of that installation. Some of them are co-payment programs, so you can actually work with your municipality you can submit a co-payment to them and they will actually get a contractor or an installer out to your property to install these projects. And then some of them are purely incentive programs where you will get some kind of sign or recognition for installing one of these practices on your property and helping the city address stormwater. And some of them will be, you install the practice and then they will help you with maintenance or vice versa. So I do highly recommend looking into incentive programs in your area. All right, and that is it for the presentation. Here's my contact information. I do know that we have a ton of questions that were submitted during the registration process, and then I'm assuming that some have also come in during the call. So I will go ahead and stop screen sharing. However, I can drop my contact information in the chat if that will be helpful, and go through some of these questions.
Carly, thanks so much. This was awesome. Shared a lot of great information. Do you want to, I don't know if you have you looked at the questions submitted ahead of time? Do you want to kind of go through what you want to, and then I can help facilitate the ones that came during? Or do you want me to just kind of start reading off questions and answer them? Either way works.
Sure. Yeah, I have looked through some of the questions that were submitted beforehand. And yeah, I can definitely go through and address some of those, especially ones that were submitted by multiple people. And then we can go through ones that were submitted now. Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
Cool. Okay. There was a good question about sizing and placement of a rain garden that I definitely wanted to make sure to address. So placement of a rain garden is very site specific. It really depends on the property that you're looking to place the rain garden on. You do not want to put the rain garden at the lowest point of your property. That might seem like the best place, but it often is not. You really want to look at where the runoff on your property is settling. And that might not be the lowest point of your property. That is where you're going to want to put the rain garden. And then sizing is also very site specific. It is going to be based on kind of the area that runoff is coming from. So if you have an impervious surface, like a driveway on your property, you're going to want to measure that driveway and then use that to calculate the size of the rain garden. If a lot of the runoff is coming from your roof, you can take the area of your roof and calculate the size of the rain garden. So to do that calculation, there are a lot of really good online calculators. Actually, if you Google like calculator rain garden size, there are some really good resources that will ask you for the square footage or something like that of the impervious surface that you're getting runoff from. And then it'll give you the recommended size of a rain garden. I believe the Chesapeake Stormwater Network has one of those calculators. That is ChesapeakeStormwater.net, I believe. They have a useful calculator. So I hope that kind of helps with that question. Where is a good area to start when addressing stormwater? I'll say that the first step to addressing stormwater on your property is identifying where it is coming from. So that might take, observing your property during a rainstorm and kind of seeing where that water is coming from. So is it flowing from a neighbor's property onto your property that you might be downhill from? Is it coming from one specific downspout on your property? In that case, a rain barrel or like a very localized practice that could sit on that downspout might help. Addressing where that runoff is coming from and then choosing a practice accordingly is going to be the first step. There were a couple questions asking about how to overcome resistance or how to address, maybe you are a downhill neighbor and you have some uphill neighbors who don't realize that water from their property is ending up on your property. I think that's a really good question, and it is a situation that a lot of people unfortunately are in. I would say, it's hard to convince someone to address a problem that isn't necessarily theirs. So I think documenting the issues that you are having through photos, videos, anything like that can go a long way. Having visual evidence of this is the issue that is happening on my property, and you can see here that is coming directly from your property. I do think that can go a long way. I also think reaching out even to your local municipality or your local government with some of the issues you've been having and having them confirm, yes, you are having stormwater issues. Being able to take, I don't know, whether that's an email or something from somebody in your local government saying yes, you do have pretty significant stormwater issues that need to be addressed. Even taking that to your neighbor can go a pretty long way in helping incentivize. Let's see. Ooh, recommendations for natural fertilizers and herbicides. So we definitely would try to stay away from chemical fertilizers and herbicides. Natural herbicide that we recommend is vinegar, actually. It's pretty good at killing off weeds and is not super harmful to the environment. In terms of, we do actually recommend hand weeding if you are able. We realize that not everybody is able to hand weed. So that's where a natural herbicide could come in handy, but we do recommend hand weeding, especially with some of the landscaping practices where you want to make sure you're pulling up the actual weeds and not the native plants that are there doing the good for your practice. You can even use a small fork or handheld shovel to do some of that weeding. That's strongly preferred as opposed to, going in with a shovel or mowing over the area or anything like that. That's definitely potentially going to damage the native plants that are in that practice. There's a good one. What is the most successful way that we've connected with people to get them to implement these practices? I love that question. So since I'm in the DC area, the Alliance actually works very closely with the DC Department of Energy and Environment to coordinate and manage the RiverSmart program, which is the main stormwater incentive program that exists here in the district. The program is wildly popular. I mean, people that have stormwater issues are highly motivated to address those issues, again, because it just creates not great situation, could lead to property damage, mosquitoes, all the things that we did go over. One of the, I would say the most prevalent way that we have seen I guess this information be communicated is through word of mouth. So if one person on a street installs one of these practices, then other people, we've seen multiple instances where other people on the street will come to us saying, hey, we saw you installed this practice on my neighbor's property. It looks really great. They say it's been capturing their stormwater. We're interested in having that too. Word of mouth is pretty huge, especially in a residential setting, like what we're talking about. Let's see. Lauren, are the questions in green the ones that have come in today? Awesome. So a question came in, how do I manage a rain barrel setup if I'm gone for a few months at a time? That is a really good question. Definitely affects people in the summer months, when we're on vacation, sometimes for many weeks at a time. If there's nobody that can come and use the water from your barrel, I think the first thing we would recommend is maybe offering that water to a neighbor. Maybe if you have neighbors close by that might be able to come and empty that rain barrel and use that water either on your property or on their own. That could be a potential solution. If that's not possible, or if nobody is willing to do that, then we would probably just have you set the barrel to divert water and not capture it while you're away. Because again, that barrel will just fill up, and then any subsequent water will just be going down that overflow hose anyway. And then you'll just have water sitting in the barrel for many weeks at a time, which it's not collecting mosquitoes because it is in a contained space, but it's not great over time. It'll just heat up over time if the sun is sitting on that barrel, and there's no real benefit to that.
Carly, something I'm going to jump in really quick. Something that you brought up earlier that there was a few questions in the chat about that's related. You mentioned emptying your rain barrel in between storms, and some people had a little confusion over that. I'm assuming what you meant was to avoid exactly that, just like having an excess of water in your rain barrel for the reasons you just stated.
Yeah, that is actually good to clarify. Thank you. Rain barrels, I mean, their main purpose is to capture water to be used at a later time. They have a limited capacity. If they're full, they're just simply not going to be capturing water for future storms. And so emptying that rain barrel in between storm events allows more to be captured, if that makes sense. Not more necessarily, but the main purpose of the rain barrel, like the rain barrel isn't helping the water infiltrate slowly. It's not kind of serving the same purpose as some of the like landscaping practices, for example. The main purpose of that barrel is that it is simply storing the water to be used at a later date. So it is keeping that water from storm drains and from becoming runoff during that actual storm, but it does need to eventually be used because it does have a limited capacity. So if it's full and it starts raining again, that barrel is no longer going to be capturing any more water.
That makes sense. And then just one follow-up question that I see that came in. Would a slow drain on the barrel at least help slow that flow and help the situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say yes, as long as that slow flow is being diverted away from your house and ideally into a landscaped area. So as you could kind of see in the pictures, rain barrels do sit right up against your house, right up against your downspout. And so simply opening up the like faucet at the bottom of your barrel and letting all that water out right near the foundation of your home, not super ideal. They do make hoses. You can get like they're called soaker hoses that you could attach to that faucet. They also make transfer pumps. There are many different things you could attach to that faucet and have that water lead out and away from your home, just to, again, keep like your foundation safe and make sure that that water is going to a vegetated area.
Thanks. A few other questions I want to make sure we get to. Can you explain the difference between a rain garden and a bioretention area?
Yeah,
or are they the
yeah,
same?
they're very, very, very similar. I think bioretention areas, from my understanding at least, can be a bit bigger, like larger scale practices. Rain gardens, again, they're sized based on the amount of runoff that is coming into that area. But we typically make them about 50 feet. But other than that, they serve the same purpose. They're really similar concepts.
And this is a great question. Are there any demonstration sites where people can go to see different examples of stormwater management practices?
Ooh, like in-person sites or
I'm assuming that's
online
what you meant,
sites?
Lori. Like, yeah, in like a place you could go in person to kind of see it functioning and how it looks. And
Yeah, yeah. Great question. It definitely depends on where you're located, I would say. A lot of the the local incentive programs have some kind of signage or marking that will note that like there is a stormwater practice on this property. So you could look for those kinds of signs. There are some local like parks. I know there are some parks here in DC that do have like rain gardens and bioretention practices installed in them. Kind of like, I think there's a bunch of rain gardens in like the Piney Branch Park area that are publicly accessible that you can go see. Yeah, you can definitely see a lot of rain barrels from driving around different houses, at least in this area too, because those are pretty visible. Yeah, it definitely depends on the area you're in, though. It's kind of tough.
yeah, I appreciate that. Good answer. I agree. I was like, that's a good question, but I feel like, yeah, when you just kind of have to drive around and find sites, but something maybe the Alliance can think about writing a blog post about and kind of collecting some of these places. We know some BMPs, stormwater BMPs specifically are. Awesome. I feel like you did it. You answered a great deal of these questions that were submitted both beforehand and during the session. I guess is there anything else, Carly, you want to share before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Not that I can think of. Definitely, I can definitely drop my email in the chat box if I didn't get to anyone's questions, or if you have a specific question about your site or your property, I would be more than happy to help you address that. We even have a maintenance assistance team over here, so I can either help you address your question or get it to the right people who can help address it. No matter where you're in the watershed, I'm happy to help out. So definitely feel free to let me know, and thank you all for joining.
That's great, Carly. Thank you so much. I think a lot of people would appreciate that. Following this call, this session was recorded, so I will be sharing the recording with all of you later this afternoon. I'll have Carly's email there as well, so if you guys weren't able to jot it down or you miss it in the chat here, I'll definitely have it included in our follow-up email. But I just wanted to say a big thank you for myself on behalf of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you all for being here, for joining us. Carly, thank you for sharing so much information with us. It was greatly appreciated. And I'll be sharing the recording, like I said, later this afternoon. Thank you all and have a great rest of your afternoon.